password on this computer. Let's try it, start over again. All right, well, we'll see what happens. So anyway, Buddy and Linda needed to watch another time, and some other people had asked about that too. And so I will upload this to our YouTube page immediately following tonight's session and send Ellen a link. And I'm sure by the middle of the day tomorrow at the latest, she'll have it on the website. So, so that is good. So just by way of introduction tonight, everybody knows who everybody is here tonight, so that's great. There were a couple of reasons that provoked my interest or got my interest in these topics. One is what Matthew chapter 5, what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, you shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. So brethren have long looked at that passage as just an invitation to practice plain, honest, direct speech without ornamentation, without any special vows or promises or anything like that, as a way of honoring our Lord. Then in Ephesians, Paul says to that congregation as he's finishing up his letter, finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his power. Put on the whole armor of God so that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. One more person wanting to come in, admit Marla. For our struggle is not against the enemies of blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. And one of the things that we all sort of knew, and Rachel really illustrated well for us last week, is that in talking about social media, that social media platforms have been intentionally designed to tap into our psychological triggers. The need that we have to be to perceive ourselves as a valued member of our tribe, even if we think our tribe is wrong. It is more important for us to be recognized as a valuable member of our tribe than to be correct. And that's wired deeply within us, deeply in our DNA. We also know that social media sites have been intentionally designed to trigger the dopamine rush in our head that a like will do. And these are things that can be researched and measured. And so we're not as in control of what we're engaging and what we're thinking and how we're being shaped as we think we are. Tonight, we transition over into 24-hour news cycle, broadcast media, print media. They too have been impacted by social media. There was by the rise of cable news before that, and then social media, moving things both to the extreme edges of debate and increasing the volume just as an effort to be heard. At least that's my assessment of the situation, and we're going to learn more about that tonight. And so how can we equip ourselves with tools so that we can understand our own biases, that we can begin to process and sense when, hey, wait a minute, maybe this story doesn't make as much sense as we might think that it does on first level, so that we can be sure that we are in as much control of our understanding of issues as we possibly can be. And so if you ever want to have a really excellent conversation, pull Jim Shaver off to the side one day after church and get him started talking about news and how the news industry works. And then just be prepared to be quiet for about an hour. And Jim will tell you everything you want to know. I love being around people who are excellent at what they do. And Jim is that way, Mike is that way. And so just listening to them talk is a fascinating experience in its own right. And so Jim and Mike, why don't you all take over and tell us a little bit about yourselves, just to make sure we've got some folks who might not know you as well. Some folks have joined the room. Welcome, Tom and Naomi and Marla. And so tell us a little about who you are, and then we'll get started with the presentation proper.
Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
All right, Mr. Shaver, I will. I appreciate, Tim, first off, the opportunity to do this. I enjoyed Rachel last week. I thought it was very, very thought-provoking and made me think about a whole lot of different things when the next time was that I clicked Facebook or Instagram and opened it up. I think it did that for everyone that listened to what she had to say. It was very, very, very different from what I expected in some ways, and exactly reaffirmed a lot of things I believe. So thanks for that first. I appreciate you guys letting Jim and I do this. Basically, my story is kind of strange in that I knew I wanted to do sports broadcasting my entire life. I used to sit in front of the television growing up and keep scorebooks and everything else, and had no idea how to get there, but knew that that's what I wanted to do. Did a lot of radio work, even as weekend work while I was in college, volunteered in high school, did internships, everything else. And by very much just a lot of luck, got a job at the best radio station really in the South when I got out of college at K92, working the fabulous 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. shift. And what it taught me was, how to be ready for anything. And I was fortunate in that station manager gave me so much rope and leeway to be creative that it allowed me to kind of create a niche in 2 years. And when Jim Shaver and Channel 7 decided they were expanding the football program, Friday Football Extra, from 15 minutes to 30, and they were increasing their NASCAR coverage, they decided they needed a third person in the sports department. And Jim Shaver hired me with not one day of television experience. And he had a knack for picking people out of radio and other mediums that he knew could write, could talk, could ad lib, could do things on the fly. And for some reason, he saw that talent in me. And I guess the greatest thing that, I can say is Jim Shaver and Jesus saved me. It wasn't in that order, but that's what happened. And he really did not just, give me the job and the opportunity, but he then allowed me to have the ability to actually do things to show what I could offer. And for me, it was never about anything that I did. It was all about the station. It was all about him. And I always looked to him like he was a teacher in school, and I didn't want to disappoint him. And I think that's the way all of us felt. And we would always, there was a lot of us at the station would say we'd follow Jim Shaver just to see where he was going. And he gave me a life and a career and allowed me to raise my family here in Roanoke without having to move all over the country. And I'll forever be indebted to him.
Man, I hope I don't get struck by lightning here.
Yeah.
I was raised up on top of Benton Mountain. As a matter of fact, Carol, I was raised in Copper Hill, which covers parts of 4 counties. I believe you were in 3 of them today: Montgomery, Floyd, Franklin, and Roanoke. So it's a huge community. I got my start in journalism when I was 15 years old at the Floyd Press. I was what you would call back in those days a printer's devil. That meant I did just a little bit of everything. This was back in the days of what they called hot type printing, where you actually had to melt lead into letters, and then you had to read the copy backward when you were proofreading. That's how far back I go. I did a little reporting for them. I did job printing for them. Just about anything you could do. But when probably the year before that, what got me really interested in journalism was watching the weekend that John F. Kennedy was assassinated. I was as fascinated by what those guys were doing in covering that as I was by the event itself. And I think you're really right in the middle of everything here. I went to school at the University of Tennessee, and I graduated on a Saturday, and the following week, I started to work as a reporter for the Roanoke Times. I got a real good contract with them. I started out with them at $3 an hour. And I didn't get beyond that in 5 years much. Anyway, I covered a great deal of Southwest Virginia, the state legislature, and Salem for a while. That gave me some value to WDBJ because, as you can tell here, my face and my voice didn't give them any value for TV. I mean, when you're raised in Southwest Virginia and then you go educate yourself in East Tennessee, you can't count on much more than what you're hearing right now. So they didn't hire me to be an on-air person. They hired me because of the things that I knew and the communities that I knew, things I had learned, the contacts I'd made when I worked for the newspaper. And we just built a great news operation there over the years. I just happened to hit the door in a heyday of local television news. I feel blessed for that. Got to hire the best people I could get, buy good equipment, because we so dominated the market. And we grew out of a newspaper, and that's the way that worked a whole lot in those days. Far different now, though. I'm not the person you're going to be able to get any kind of social media guidance from. I'm hoping Mike will be able to bail us out on that. What I want to talk about first are a couple of fairly significant things, one of which Tim has already alluded to, that occurred in the 80s, long before we were talking about social media, certainly in the way we talk about it today, but I think has a significant impact on it. The first one goes back to Channel 7, like many stations in this country. The only way you could see it was from a rabbit ears or television antenna.
That's just for the mic.
And the
This
stuff
happened
in-
last night.
Yeah.
What's up?
And,
You turn your speakers on, will that work?
and I knew that when I was home as a kid, 6 to 7 o'clock at every night, there was one TV in the house, which is where it was in most of Southwest Virginia in those days, mid to late 50s. That TV belonged to mom and dad. They were going to watch the news. People just naturally watched Channel 7 at 6 and Channel 7 at 6:30 because of Walter Cronkite. And you got a real broad brush of what was going on. And it was news. You had reporters out there covering it. Some of Channel 7's civil rights coverage in the early to mid 60s was spectacular because they were still owned by the newspaper. And their reporters could go out, a lot of time in Charlottesville, a lot of time in some other Prince Edward County, but their reporters could go out and cover that while we were taking stories off the hook in the newsroom at the newspaper, and we could keep the regular everyday newscasts covered. So there's a real strong history of news in an organization. In the early 1980s, when cable started taking hold, most of us I very naively looked at it then as, okay, that's a great conduit to get our signal out. Because a lot of people can't see us from the antennas. Raised in Copper Hill, I didn't watch Roanoke TV because I could not see it. I was not 10 miles as a crow flies from WDBJ's transmitter, but I had to get CBS News out of FMY in Greensboro, Winston-Salem and High Point for the ABC and NBC News, just the way that it worked. But the important thing was, it was focused. You covered many different things. People got a real sense of the world they lived in. Cable news hit in the early 80s. Ted Turner expanded his station in Atlanta, and from that grew CNN, Cable News Network, 24-hour broadcast. Now, when I worked at the television station, it was sometimes really, really touch and go as to whether we could fill the 3 or 4 hours we had to fill every day when there wasn't any news going on. And when you're looking at 24/7, that's a mighty tall order. As time went on, that morphed into particularly a lot more political coverage. And instead of having reporters in many cases, you had pontificators. You had people who were college professors, who were teachers, lawyers, people who had various backgrounds, but they weren't reporters, but they were talking about events in the news and sort of pontificating on what could happen. Once again, political news at the top. And it was kind of interesting to me because the only pontificating we did in our local newscast were the weather guys, and they hoped they got that right. But these guys would talk about this is going to happen or this is going to happen. And it started to feed more and more 24-hour newscasts. MSNBC, CNBC, and of course Fox News, which is far and above in this day the single most watched cable news channel. And in many times it outpaces sporting events and some entertainment programming because it has such a concentrated, loyal audience. So as that started, toward the end of the 80s, the thing that came in that I believe has more to do today with our dialogue and how we talk to each other through the media, to each other individually, and that was the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine. The Fairness Doctrine was an FCC mandate to local over-the-air television stations that you had to cover controversial events in your community, and you must give more viewpoints than just what you were covering. That way, if there was a big school issue going on, you heard it from 2 or 3 different ideas. When that went away, you immediately started seeing first the building of these real opinionated radio talk programs. This was probably late 80s, early 90s. 87 was when the Fairness Doctrine was repealed. And you had from that, I mean, you had radio, you had Glenn Beck, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, many more. On the liberal side, you didn't have too many around here because, quite honestly, the liberal radio shows are not going to sell in the Southwest Virginia market. And remember, we're talking about these people making money. So the fallacy in getting rid of the Fairness Doctrine was that, okay, everybody's got a point of view now, people will be able to hear it all. Well, no, that's not the way it worked at all. What happened was, a lot of these places were making considerable amounts of money on these programs, but there wasn't anything to counter what they were saying. And over time, people just started taking that as well. It's fact. That's what happened. And then when Fox News came on in the late 90s and had some of these same people on their own air, that just increased it. There were several attempts after 1980, 2004, 2008, I believe, to reinstate Fairness Doctrine, but it never came to pass. And in 2011, it just was removed from the Federal Register. So I think that not having that outlet to where you hear multiple viewpoints has done more for these hateful conversations, for these conversations where people know they're wrong, but they don't care, they're convinced they're right, and there's no challenge to it. That's probably one of the single biggest things that's brought us to where we are now in the social media part. And Mike and I are going to talk some now about the ownership of our own stations in the market and how that plays in information we receive. Go ahead, Mike.
All right, Tim, can you see this? Can everybody see the screen?
No.
Yes or no?
Now
No.
it's
Good.
what screen?
Tim, how about you? Are you seeing a welcome screen up there?
No, I'm not. Let me.
All right, just hold 1 second. Hold tight. Everybody just hang with us. Let's see here what we got. How about now?
There we go.
Yes.
All right, now we got something up there.
Yes,
PowerPoint.
All right, how about now? Full screen?
There we go.
Yes.
That's good.
Yes.
Okay, all right, very good, very good. So first thing, I want y'all to see this picture right here. If you can see my shirt, my t-shirt there, it says, "We love Shaver." And Margie threw a big party for him when he turned 80. Was that right, Jim, 80? What birthday was that? Way back a few years ago. And she had these shirts for everyone. And the guy on the right, Neil Dudley, passed a few years ago, and he was as integral part of that station and its success as anyone. And just a great friend. And that was the day of Jim Shaver's retirement from Goodwill right there. And yeah, Jim meant a lot to everybody. And what he said about the Fairness Doctrine really plays into what he's going to talk about now as far as these media outlets in here. And if something's cut off, I apologize. Hopefully you can see most of that.
No, it's good.
The Roanoke Times started in the late 1800s. M.L. Claytor started it. In the early 20th century, the Fishman family bought it. They owned the bank here in Roanoke. And over the years, it became Times World Corporation, and was Times World Corporation producing 2 separate newspapers, the Roanoke Times in the morning the Roanoke World News in the afternoon. They had, when I started to work for them in 1970, they actually had 5 editions of the newspaper. The first one we called the Bulldog Run, and it went all the way down almost to Bristol. And then you would back them up until the last one, the latest edition, would cover the Roanoke Valley. It was sold to Landmark Communications in the 1960s. And Landmark had to divest itself of the television station because the Times owned DBJ as well. And the way the FCC rule was, if you owned a TV station and a newspaper in the same market, you could continue to do that as long as you were the organization who started that you were the original organization. But once you sold it, you had to split them. Somebody else said there had to be a separate owner of one or the other of them. So at that particular point in time, the Roanoke Times was bought by Landmark Communications, which, by the way, is the organization that started the Weather Channel. And the WDBJ was sold to Sheriff's Communications. That was good for both of those organizations because Landmark had a wonderful, wonderful reputation in news and community service. And the Sheriff's Corporation was almost like a Times World in Indiana. They owned the newspaper in South Bend and then had a television station there as well. And they took ownership in 1969. So we had corporate owners back years ago, but not in the same kind of way we have corporate owners now. The Roanoke Times, the World News, probably been, I don't know how many years since the World News was rolled into the Times and there was no afternoon newspaper, mainly because 6 o'clock newscasts pretty much filled that void. So it's been a while since that occurred. And the Roanoke Times has, as you've seen, shrunk and shrunk and shrunk because it's losing things like classified advertising. Classified advertising used to be the financial, fiscal backbone of a newspaper. And it's all but gone because of things like Craigslist and some of these other places that you can, you get information and buy things online. Warren Buffett's outfit, BH Media, bought the Times and several other newspapers, the old Media General newspapers, which included the Richmond Times-Dispatch, a few years back, and they were having a difficult time making a go of it. And so Lee Enterprises, which was actually the company operating the papers for Buffett, bought the Times a couple of years ago. Now, if you notice, and they not only bought the Times, they bought 9 or 10 other daily newspapers from Bristol to Fredericksburg. Almost all of the daily newspapers in Virginia now are owned by one company. They not only bought daily newspapers, they bought many, many small community newspapers, including the little paper in Floyd that I started my career at, the Floyd Press. But you notice where they're located. They're from Davenport, Iowa. And the most recent controversy there's been involving their ownership is that they are taking copy editors away from these local markets and actually doing a central copy editing desk in either Indiana or Wisconsin. And copy editors, I never did much like them when I was a reporter because I always thought my stuff was so great nobody needed to edit it. But the simple fact of the matter is they save a newspaper's bacon every day. And to take at least half of those copy editors and move them 1,000 miles away from where the paper's being published is a real disservice to that community. So the Roanoke Times is owned by Lee Enterprises, Davenport, Iowa. And then what have we got next, Mike?
Well, I would just jump in here and add to that having known the reporters and worked with them in the field and now in my job when they come to Salem for stories, that every time that a sale has happened, the ones that Jim just chronicled, it has been a hope that things would get better, but they have only gotten worse. And there's been a mass exodus of people either by firings or by their own choice. And right now, to give you an idea, 2 weeks ago, the sports editor of the paper, Stephen Hemphill, was completely fired. Did nothing wrong. They just now are operating without a sports editor in the paper. We have not had an actual reporter of any type cover a Salem City Council meeting for the last month because they don't have staff to even get to all the meetings right now. So to Jim's point, all of these outside entities that are owning these traditional media places are seeing struggles every single day. No doubt about it.
Mike, let me jump in here. You told me a story about how the Home Place restaurant was covered in the newspaper the other day that I thought is another way to illustrate what
Right.
you're talking about. Can you
Right.
give that story?
Sure. I'd be glad to. So, as most of you know, the Home Place restaurant in Southwest Virginia is synonymous with, family gatherings, fried chicken, and buffet style eating and family style atmosphere at your table. And they've struggled in COVID, of course, because of their business model. They've tried various things, and they announced, the Wingate family did 2 weeks ago, that they're going to have to shut down until 2021 and hope that they can come back then, but they just don't know. But I was really struck that the headline in the Roanoke Times said, "Folksy restaurant to close until 2021." Well, I knew right away that was written by a copy editor in Davenport, Iowa, because that's not a folksy restaurant. That's an iconic place for all of us in Southwest Virginia. We all know what the Home Place is, and I just felt like that was a disservice to what really that place was about, and it showed me exactly what these ownership changes have caused.
WDVJ has had two owners up until now. Like I say, the Schurz family operated the station very much like it operated its other stations, and it's including a station in South Bend. It had several television stations from Roanoke to Alaska. In 2015, I believe, the Schurz family, which was now in the third generation of Schurz people, decided to sell all of their properties to Gray Communications. Gray already owned stations in Richmond, Charlottesville, and Harrisonburg. Charlottesville and Harrisonburg they had for a long period of time. And what you saw there when that happened was almost all of the things that you could cover locally through your station. Many of those things went away. You didn't have the bureaus like you have them now. Some are still there. Richmond Bureau's been gone for a long time. But it's just a totally different kind of environment. It's really hard to see that television station in the kind of situation it is right now, because these stations, these companies are publicly owned companies. And that's a big deal in media, because that means that they are first responsible to a board of directors, public board of directors. Schurz was a privately held company. And so everything was pretty much self-contained. But every one of these that we're looking at now are all publicly held companies, and their loyalties have to be first to those stockholders who have invested in their business. And there have just been all kinds of changes, at the television station. Look, these people didn't spend $442.5 million for these television stations to come into a market, increase staff by 10%, give everybody a 10% raise and sing Kumbaya. That's not the way that works. So there's been a lot of cuts, probably more coming, but increased amounts of news coverage with the same or smaller staff. And you can pretty much figure what that means. This is, actually enough, Channel 10's owners are the smallest media group of the four stations in town's owners. And it comes from that Washington Post Graham family. I don't know if you remember Catherine Graham, her husband ran it, he died, and she was the one who was running the Washington Post during Watergate. It's that group. They're headquartered in Chicago, but they only own 6 television stations in medium to large markets. And Mike? St. Clair Broadcast Group owns WSET, and it is the closest, geographically, the closest station to our market. Broadcast group to our market in Hunt Valley, Maryland. It owns and operates 193 stations in 100 markets. The country's second largest broadcast group. And I don't know how long it's been now since it's taken over SET, but all of these have occurred in a reasonably contained period of time. FXR, the Fox station, is owned by the Nexstar Broadcast Group. This organization owns 197 televisions, the largest television group in America, and it's headquartered out of Irving, Texas. So you're just not seeing much local here. And one of the concerns that I have is I've always been a significant proponent of community journalism. That what happens, what was it old Tip O'Neill used to say, all politics is local? Well, all news is local at some point, and we're losing that. The TV stations, the newspapers, small little community newspapers are being grouped into several papers into one group. And as Mike was talking about a few minutes ago, the newspaper trying to get people together just to come and cover Salem City Council meetings, in which, you know, Salem is right in the heart of its coverage area. You'd like to see that happen, but that's not unusual. It's happening everywhere. They don't cover anything to deal with local governments in a lot of these places, and school boards and boards of supervisors and city councils and city school boards. They have a place in our community, and it has a great deal of impact on us. And I don't know the answer to that, but that's where we start getting a little bit closer to what we're talking about here tonight with social media. You can make an argument that Facebook is now the community journalist. The problem with that is it has no breaks, and you don't even have a copy editor in Wisconsin editing what gets on Facebook. And we are depending on that as a news source when it does not have the same kinds of standards and rules to live by that we had in the commercial business. And I think that's a dangerous thing. I don't have an answer for it. It's just an observation that we are going now to other places for information. And unfortunately, so many of us are taking that information as factual, as gospel, that this is what it is, and they will argue till they're blue in the face that it's what it is. But I think what I've tried to do here is show you all of this plays into where we are now, and I think where we're going.
So Jim's given you kind of an overview of where the stations are as far as ownership and how it's adversely affected all of what you see here locally in your homes. So after spending 25 years doing television, I now have these folks coming to Salem to do stories. And I have a lot of observations, some of which I've shared with Tim. I share with Jim a lot, and the way I see these people, and it's not good. And so we're going to go through some fast-paced slides here, and I'm going to show you a whole bunch of different things about the media in our area that you may or not understand or may or not believe. And I'm going to also show you some things that are different from now compared to 1985 when I started at Channel 7 when Jim Shaver hired me for all of $12,500 a year, I believe it was, or something quality like that. All right, can you see the numbers? Do I need to move that a little bit, make it smaller?
I go down one, Mike.
So 100, let me see if I can kind of, yeah, it's not going to help either the way it's going to do. So let me just go back to it. But anyway, if you're looking at this, I'll make sure that we can understand it. Let me fly back through here real quick and get to this slide. So in 1995, forget 85, because I've got this right here is a framed newspaper, a full page ad that my mom had framed. She was so excited about this when it went in the Roanoke Times, and there's a bar graph in the middle, and I know you can't see that, but the red bar is Channel 7. At that time in 1995, we had more viewers at our 6 o'clock newscast than any station in the state of Virginia. So think about the population disparity in Richmond, Tidewater, and other places of the state compared to Roanoke, yet we had more viewers than any other station at 6 o'clock. And a matter of fact, as you can see here, up until 95, DBJ had more viewers combined than the other three stations at 6 o'clock. I mean, it was a dynasty. It was a juggernaut. It was huge. But look what happens in 2017. DBJ's number goes from 119,000 all the way down to 65. The numbers for the other stations also decrease, and the total number of news viewers drop by well over 60, almost 70,000 viewers. So the reason for that is kind of what Jim just alluded to. Cell phones came about. The internet got stronger. People decided, wow, there's a whole lot of other ways I can get my news, and I don't have to wait for 6 o'clock or plan my day around that particular time slot. I don't even have to record it because I've got news all the time, 24/7 on my phone even now. So now the number of viewers has gone down. So what does that do when you go try to sell this product to an advertiser? You can't deliver the audience you once could. Margie can tell you all about that.
Mike, I want to interject real quick, something I think might be interesting.
Sure.
I purchased that ad for the station. It was a one-time Sunday ad, and it cost $10,000 for one time on a Sunday. My point there is no way that newspaper is getting $10,000 for one ad for anything these days.
No, you're right. They have actually offered some full page ads at different times of the year for under $700, if you can believe that. So really, really hard to believe. So this is a good thing right here. And one of the things that Jim Shaver always taught us as reporters and photographers, be a good storyteller. And that doesn't mean make it up. That means tell the story so it's interesting. And now in 2020, they just want more stories and less telling. If you understand what I'm saying, Channel 7 has 8 hours of news to fill every day. You heard Jim earlier, 3 hours was a challenge. 8 hours of news here. So as Jim points out a lot, the increase in newscasts has been really great for dogs and cats. They are getting more coverage now and are being seen more often on newscasts than ever before. So being a good storyteller just isn't critical anymore. This is what you also see. Very young, inexperienced people in the job, on their own, constantly being pushed, constantly on deadline. All of these things are bad. The bullet number 2, on their own, is particularly disappointing to me because Adam Ward, who was tragically killed along with Allison Parker, was my last intern at Channel 7. He was a Salem kid. After that happened, there was this big commitment and this big push by all these general managers that existed at the time that reporters will never go out by themselves again. We'll never let, especially the females, out in the field. Rarely do I ever see a reporter of either gender accompanied by a photographer anymore at any place when they come to Salem. They're always by themselves, and that's disappointing. But all of this, because I know from experience, if you're doing it on your own, yes, you control what you shoot, what you edit, but you've got 10 different things to do and you're on deadline. And when you are, this is what happens right here, these type of things. These are, I know in the paper, you see mistakes all the time. They show up everywhere. This one right here, you may wonder why it's in here. A headline that says man killed to death. Unbelievable for this station. Jim can tell you at one point in time, WBTV in Charlotte was the measuring stick for everything in the South. And they're just as bad as everyone else right now. Now, what could be controversial about our Fresh Ideas Garden in Salem, where we grow food and then give it to the food pantry? Nothing, I thought, when the reporter came over, but when it went on the air, it came up as a communist garden needing volunteers and not a community garden. So these are often mistakes that are funny, but they happen a lot of times because people are just rushing, understaffed, young, inexperienced. So this in 1985 was the key thing. I know Channel 7 calls itself your hometown station right now, but in 1985, it really wasn't a slogan. It was a way of life, and it was a way of doing your job. And if you didn't get that, then you could go work somewhere else because you didn't fit into Jim Shaver's world. You didn't fit into the promotions that Margie wanted to do, and you didn't fit into anything in that newsroom. I never forget the day that I thought it was a trick question when Jim Shaver asked me, do you understand when you cover a football game, you're not covering two teams? And I had no idea at the time what he was talking about. And he went on to explain, you're covering not two teams, but two communities. So when you go out there, I don't want to just see the plays. I want to see the guy selling hot dogs, taking up tickets. I want to see the band, the cheerleaders. I want to see everyone, because on Friday night, whether you're the president of the bank or the janitor of the high school, you both have your Salem or Patrick Henry or Floyd County football clothes on, and you're equals. And Jim Shaver understood how to get these hometowns to watch Channel 7. But now, as I said, they just rely on Google Maps. They don't know from one day to the next where they are. They don't know what their location is. And I'm going to give you a good example right here. This was on my watch in Salem. So let me just tell you, it doesn't matter if Roanoke Times readership is down. When you're splashed at the top of the page and you're on the front page, above the fold, as they call it, you got a problem. So this headline, 1 week in Salem, 3 overdose deaths. I got up that morning, picked up the paper, and I'm like, what is this? And I know that Sharon probably remembers this day. It took me just about 2 or 3 minutes to finally figure out what the issue is. And if you look in the back left where that tree is, there's a trash can sitting back there. And the trash can is black. In the city of Salem, our trash cans are green. That's a Roanoke County trash can.
Oh,
Ooh.
So the deaths took place in 24153, but in the Glenver area, the Dixie Cabins area. So I contact the reporter, who's young. I contact the editor of the paper, and sure enough, they did like a very small 8-point font retraction on page 2 that no one saw and didn't even admit to their mistake. But these are the things that happen when you don't have continuity, you have young people, you have rushing. So the reason that I bring some of these mistakes up are not to make anyone feel bad who created these or made them, is to show you that this is why even when you're watching traditional media, you have to really dissect and look at what you're watching. You have to really almost do your research when you're seeing it. 1985, Jim Shaver will tell you nothing meant more to him than having experience on his staff. Right now, 1 year is considered experience. And Jim can expound on this, but I'll tell you, he and I were looking for what they call a side hustle now when he retired. And we thought, you know, here's what we could do. We could go into these TV stations. We see this need for training for these young reporters. Go in a couple times a month, go into a station 3 or 4 hours, work with the young reporters. Nothing else, let them know that if you're in Virginia, how to say with Bill, how to say freeze, how to say Ray Fiend, just basic stuff. News directors we contacted told me at least, this is an unbelievable idea. But to be honest with you, we don't want to spend the resources on it because we don't think the reporters are going to be here long enough to get a dividend off of it. That's where we are right now. And so that was extremely disappointing for Jim as well. So you've got young media, you got media on their own, you got them understaffed, you got them being pushed on deadline. They're always looking for stories. So they're going to rely on what? Facebook. They're going to Facebook. I could not begin to tell you how many times I get a call or an email from a reporter or producer that will say, we heard, or someone told us, or we saw. And when I push them, they'll say, well, it was on Facebook. Somebody wrote on our Facebook page. They wrote on our Facebook page. All of these icons you see right here are fabulous. But the greatest nugget that I pulled out of last week's talk was uttered by our pastor. Tim said, I remember my mother, my grandmother, all my parents, all my relatives telling me growing up, son, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them in proportion. The problem now is, as Tim pointed out, we also have 10 fingers. And that's what gets everyone into trouble. That's the problem. So, Jim, talk about this a little bit. 1985 we were always told you cover the issues and you cover both sides. Now it's cover the emotions.
Oh, yeah, that's obviously an easier thing to do. And I think probably the audience takes to that a lot quicker than covering something like the issues. But when you get into situations where you've got things that affect a broad number of people, there's going to be a whole bunch of emotions coming from that at some point, instead of just talking about somebody that's maybe been involved in a horrible accident or involved in something that's happening to their property. They have to cover what they can cover quickly. And I have no idea how many photographers they have now, but I do know that most of them are shooting their own material. Those, I have always felt, those are two separate jobs. I want a good photographer that's got a good eye, and all that photographer's worrying about is bringing back the best video he or she can. And the same thing with the reporter. Worry about the story, what the story says. Our reporters over the years learned so much from photographers. Those photographers were some of the steadiest employees we had, and they really knew the community and learned that. 1985 was an interesting year for us to tell you how much things have changed. I'm sure many of you remember the flood of 85 here in town. That happened to be the same day there was a gubernatorial election in Richmond. And we had to cover both of those things and hit these breaks all evening long with the staff we had. And of course, Richmond, we had to set up satellite shots, microwave shots, those kinds of things. I don't see how that would happen now. I just don't see that there's enough people there. What would happen is one person may freelance and sell it to a bunch of stations, so you don't get your own local people on it. Let me say one thing real quick, not in defense of, but as an explanation for why some of this has happened. Particularly newspapers have just been hit really, really hard by the competition that social media has brought. They were late coming to the game as far as getting their websites up and running. I remember working with our company in the mid-90s. They had created an organization called Kiva, and actually this organization was going to sell websites, develop websites, and they never got it off the ground because they didn't think they could make any money on it. Sure wish I had it now, but it's very, very difficult to make money to support and sustain what we're doing in a media environment as cluttered as it is today. I mean, it's just almost impossible. I truly don't know what's going to happen with newspapers. I mean, if you look at, just pick up a copy of the Roanoke newspaper today and pick up one from 10 years ago, it's like you're living in two different places. And it's concerning. And you know, no community should be without a newspaper. But if that newspaper is stripped down to nothing, you don't have a newspaper. And the same thing is true with the television stations. They're having to, one single station would be really hard pressed, number one, to compete in buying programming and covering news. And number two, in being able to generate the kinds of programs that would make it money to keep going forward. So it's a tough place. And I don't see a lot of this going the other way. I think we're going to continue to see this kind of thing in the next few years. You think back to the turn of the century in 2000, well, there was very little going on at that particular point in time with social media. I remember all we were worried about then was Y2K and was the world going to go dark when all the computers went and kick over to a new century. But just look how fast social media has exploded in so many different directions.
So we're going to take a look at an explosion right here that social media caused. And this will be a great example for all of you to see. And when I tell you the backstory on this, I think you'll all be collectively shaking your heads. So this is Andrew Lewis Middle School in Salem. This is the alma mater of many people, including Kate Elmore Hoyt. She went from there, was a cheerleader there. So a couple of years ago, we had an instance at Andrew Lewis. Obviously, parents go to work early. They can't all drop their kids off at the same time. So you have an area for early morning drop-off. And when that happens, all children are to go to the cafeteria, where they stay until a certain bell rings, and then they are able to go into the different halls. Two individuals came into the school and decided it would be a good idea to go into a hall they weren't supposed to be into, and they had what likes to be called now negative peer-to-peer interaction. Some like to call it bullying, some like to call it horseplay, but that's what happened. So what happened was in 1985, Jim Shaver would never allow us to do anything except report the facts. But because of social media, now the media outlets report what people say. Now, there's a big difference, because I'm going to tell you right now, if Noel Taylor, who was the mayor of Roanoke, if somebody had shown up at the door and said, hey, I've got a camera here full of film of Noel Taylor going into a motel room with some kind of lady that's not his wife, Jim Shaver would not even have looked at that. They would, because it wasn't something we had, we would have to fact check that for 10 years before that ever made the light of day on the air. Now it doesn't matter. And I want to give you a great example of this, because this was a girl who was a decent reporter at the time, but this cost us a lot of headache and a lot of problems in Salem. And I'll tell you the eventual outcome, and you're going to be saddened by it. So the Roanoke Times wrote this, and if you can read it, take a moment, and I'll read it out loud for those of you who can't. A Facebook post being shared widely is said to have been written by the parent of one of the students involved and describes a period of about a half hour where the author's child was assaulted. The Roanoke Times was unable to reach the post author for comment or to even confirm the account. So we don't know who wrote it, and we don't even know if it's a legitimate account, but it goes in the paper, front page of the Virginia section, about a child being assaulted at Andrew Lewis Middle School. So our response was that a spokesman for the school system says the district would not confirm the accuracy or authenticity of the post, because to do so would set a precedent for this in the future, and there would be an expectation to acknowledge every social media post in question. So this too passed like everything else, but I want to tell you the outcome. There were 2 children involved in this, underage, of course, because they're at middle school. Both of them on the spectrum, on different parts of it, as special needs children. They knew each other. They were horse playing. One student took it too far and put the other into a room and wouldn't let him out. As it turned out, the children both acknowledged that this was something that they were doing. They knew they were horse playing. They did this all the time. But the parent of the child who was quote unquote bullied on the other end of it pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. And what happened was the child had to eventually move out of Salem to North Carolina. So at the end of the day, who bullied who on this, especially when it came down to children? And neither one of these things came about because of facts. They came about because of somebody posting something on a social media page. So the media that Jim and I have just described in this age and time, there are days when I welcome them. Most days I don't want to see them. I hate to see their caller ID. I don't need them a lot of days. And parents inform them of everything. If we send a note home to a parent, it's going straight to the media, because the parents are the reporters now. Now, why don't I need media? This is why. If you can read that screen, it's because now social media has allowed you to create your own narrative. So from my point of view as a communications officer in the city of Salem, I love this. I can send the media. They would much rather get a press release written by me or a link to a story written by me, and the Salem Times, for the most part, will run it 100% the way I sent it to them. I mean, it's unheard of in the Jim Shaver era of journalism, but that's where we are right now, and a lot of it's because of time. So it is advantageous to me, and it's advantageous to us when we're doing something like publicizing Sleep in Heavenly Peace with Dave Jones. I can control who I try to sell that story to for Dave. I can control the images I push out. I can control the content of our story. And most importantly, I can control the tone. I can set the tone and make it so that it's not going to create a lot of negative feedback and a lot of noise and a lot of emotion. So there's a lot of choices out there where you can get your information. I thought Rachel did a great job of talking about those, but you all have got these icons now ingrained in your mind. You know exactly what they are because of the way they've been marketed and the way you get your news. So what about those things? Why do we need to hear from a guy named Jeff Smith and one other fellow you're going to hear from here in a second? Well, you can control the narrative, but what I would like to explain to you is when you violate the Tim Harvey doctrine of letting those 10 fingers go crazy, you're going to find trouble. This is Jeff Smith, Radford High School principal. There was a election, city council in Radford, and he wrote on a Facebook page, "I predict this is the beginning. The council members are ultra liberal, and they're part of the spineless and Harshbarger caterers to Radford University. Hardly surprising since an atheist, an agnostic, and a spineless opportunist were elected. You decide which is which. They are all interchangeable in my eyes." This is the high school principal in Radford writing this on a Facebook page. Believe it or not, he is still employed there. Now, what's fascinating to me about this is, first off, that he would think it's okay to do it, because as a high school principal, you're representing that whole community, and also that he would get away with it. Anybody seen that image right there? Anybody know who that is?
Yeah.
So that image wasn't even left up on social media more than a few minutes, yet it's all over the place, because there are people who will take anything you post, or especially anything somebody famous posts, and they will grab a screen image of it and they will hold it and they will do something with it. Now, I don't know if you know, but today Mr. Falwell sued Liberty University, claiming that the university ruined his reputation. You can think on that a little bit. So here's what I want to bring you towards the end of this, as far as what you put on social media and what you digest. Freedom of speech is fabulous, but people often forget that what you say is never free of consequences. No matter what it is, someone is going to be upset. Someone's going to like it, someone's going to love it, but someone is not going to. So there are consequences to what we say. And whatever you say or post is out there forever. It is what I like to call the accessible permanent record. You know, when you were in school, and today when I get a call from somebody and they want to know about a kid's behavior, and we can always say that's part of the child's permanent record, we're not releasing that. Well, the accessible permanent record is what happens when you put something out there on social media and you do anything that's not great. This is a good friend of mine, Randy Foley, Salem mayor from 2008 to 2020. He's still on city council. I covered Randy, Channel 7. He was a Friday Football Extra Player of the Week back in 1986 when Salem made it to the state championship game for the first time in school history. I was on my way to a wedding in Charlotte. We were spending the night at my sister-in-law's house in Greensboro. Phone rang at 2:00 in the morning. It was the police chief telling me that the mayor had been arrested for being drunk in public on the Roanoke College campus. I remember going through this with him that night, the next day, once I got back to Salem from the wedding, and into that week. And he had left a football party. He had decided to walk home. He made the bad decision of cutting through campus. The students did exactly what they were taught. They reported some strange individual who wasn't a college-age person on campus, and campus security stopped him. He cooperated, police came, and that was it. So I remember the conversation we had about, do I pay the fine and move on, or do I fight this? And paying the fine would put his name on his permanent record. And I remember his wife making the most profound statement. She said, Randy, your name is already on the permanent record. It's called Google. Anytime someone Googles Randy Foley, this will come up forever. And that's the truth. And that's what we have to be aware of and be careful of. So when we get to the end here, our media policy in Salem is this: all direct inquiries come through my office for schools and city. And people say, why in the world do you do that? Why can't Why can't people, if I want to talk to the electric department about a storm damage or want to talk to the Civic Center, why can't I just call them? Well, a lot of it, what it does is it creates accountability. It gives accountability to the superintendent and the city manager, so nothing can happen without them actually knowing about it. But the reason we do this, and the reason that Jim Shaver was such a good boss, and the reason that I feel like I was able to have the career I have, is kind of summed up by this guy. This is Mike Clark. Many of you may know him. He's the football coach at Bridgewater College. Now, Mike Clark played for Frank Beamer at Murray State. He was Frank Beamer's first defensive coordinator. He was the scapegoat that had to be fired in Blacksburg in order for Frank to keep his job. And Mike Clark brought Bridgewater to the Stag Bowl in 2001, and he is just the most down-to-earth guy. But he has a quote that he uses that I think is key in making anybody or anything successful. I have managed the parade from both ends, and trust me, it is much easier from the front. Now, if you think about this, it makes a lot of sense. If you're up front with people, if you're honest, if you treat people the way they want to be treated, if you're prepared, if you're organized, all of these things that allow you to be successful on the front end keep you from cleaning up the mess of the elephants on the back end. And it's just something that I have always taken to heart. He's a great guy and, just a really, really good person. This is all that Jim and I have as far as presentation, but we will take any questions, Tim, unless we're out of time, but I'm going to leave that up to you, sir.
Well, I know we have, there's one thing I wanted to add. And I learned this evening that Ben Tatum and I basically have the same question. So Ben's not on tonight, but I'm going to say hello to Ben anyway, because he said he was going to watch the recording, and I completely believe that. So Ben, hello. Let me read Ben's question and let me read mine. They're essentially the same, I think. Ben says this. He says, Ben and his family watch Channel 7 News. He has always felt it's pretty balanced. He noticed a difference this summer and felt like they had more of a slant covering hot topics, elections, COVID-19, racial events. Did you all notice this, and what do you think about it? My comment comes from Ezra Klein, who is the founder of Vox News. I don't always agree with everything that he says politically, but I do trust his analysis, his ability to step back and analyze the situation. And his comment is, the political media is biased, but not toward the left or right, so much as toward loud, outrageous, colorful, inspirational, and confrontational. Ben and I think, are working with very similar ideas in those two comments. I'm curious what your all's observation is on that.
You go ahead, Jim.
Well, I haven't seen a local newscast in so long, I couldn't tell whether they were fair and balanced before or what they are now. I don't watch local television news much at all. But I think if you just look at the issues that he's talking about, they seem to me the kind of issues that ought to be covered. Now, the way that they're covered, I can't address, but COVID and some of these other political things, I think that's the same problem with national news. You cover, it's like you cover the movement, it doesn't matter what's being said, the noise is what they cover. And I do believe that's the problem nationally.
Well, I'll say two things on that. I think it goes back to the slide about covering the emotions. And that's what, I think they're looking for. It used to be, if it bleeds, it leads. You'd put accidents up front, and it drove me crazy. We'd put these little car wrecks that happened at 10:30 at the top of the newscast where we didn't know 30 seconds worth of anything about them, and I'd lose the story in sports because they needed time. But it would supposedly attract viewers. So the emotion is part of it. But I'll tell you, I'll share a story. It's funny because I got a call right before we went on. I didn't have time to speak to him, but Greg Moore was a photographer for many years at Channel 7. He's now at Channel 10. And he has a real knack of cultivating contacts that last a long time. He can talk his way, and Jim will agree to this, into about any situation. No matter what it is, Greg would figure out a way to get a camera in there. And so he had built up a good relationship to get into a number of places at VMI over this past week during this controversy. And today they went down, and whomever the reporter was, they interviewed 2 African-American cadets. And so Greg said, well, let's go ahead and get the VMI side of this as well. And we're good because you've got the hardest part of this done. And the guy said, oh, I didn't contact anybody from VMI side. I don't really need to have what they want to say today because that's not going to fit what I'm trying to do. So Greg is like, I don't understand why we're not telling both sides of this story tonight. So it was very disturbing to him because he's from the old school way of Jim Shaver, where the fairness doctrine was still in play, and where if you came back and told only one side of the story, you were in trouble. Y'all don't know this, but Jim Shaver had a room that was his office that had a TV in it. And if he came out of that office during the 6 o'clock local news with his hands on his hips, you better run. And I mean, you better run far, duck, everything. Because if he came out and his hands were on his hips, somebody was about to get some enthusiastic words thrown their way.
What they call a stern talking to.
Yes, yes.
Well, and I think Ben's question is helpful because, at some point there has to be some thought to what is a hot topic. And so in an election year, would we consider covering the elections a hot topic, or is that just, how do you balance all of that out? Some mornings I just rather listen to 80s music because I'm just tired of hearing election coverage, So, I guess that, where are the editors that make those?
Well, I'll just say this for you. I mean, the station, and Jim can speak to this, but the station spent, tens of thousands of dollars on election coverage every time there was an election. I mean, that was big time stuff to us, to be to first with the results, but have both sides after the election. And we were the place that people came for the election. There was no doubt about that. I mean, we were the best at doing that. And we should have been, as Jim said, we had more people, more toys, more equipment. We were better funded. We should be better. And he made us better. But what I will say has changed on that is, and I look at this Brady Bunch scenario on Zoom here and the people who are in this, and how many of you raise your hand? We're going to get almost everybody but Eli, I think. Remember when the television stations went to color bars at midnight or sometime? They signed off. So as Jim said earlier, when you only had your morning newspaper and you only had the 6 o'clock news and the 11 o'clock news, you knew you had to be free schedule-wise to get the information of the day. Now we get information a million different ways, yet we are less informed than ever before because we don't make it a priority, we don't dig into it, and we don't listen. So we have more ways to get our information, but we do a worse job getting it than ever before, in my opinion.
Tim, one of the things that I've noticed is right now when you cover politics, you're covering service. You're not covering. When's the last time you heard any kind of really thoughtful, issues-oriented, problem-solving kind of things that used to bore us all during elections? Now it's a big show. It truly is a show. And when you've got these 24-hour cable channels showing it all the time, it's just feeding the engine. I don't know what we're going to do Tuesday.
Eli has had his hand up for a couple of minutes, and so I want to hear Eli's question.
All right. So, I have this question. So, I like watching Jeopardy, and they have Jeopardy on Channel 7. And one thing I've noticed is that there are a lot of political ads. I mean, a lot of political ads, one after another. Are political ads becoming more of a thing nowadays compared to
Hey, Jim, if you would explain the cost of political ads, why people think that when the political season came that you could just jack the rates up for Trump and Biden and do whatever you want.
Once the election, the parties have been in place and the election is on, television station has to charge only its lowest unit rate for a political commercial. But to what Eli's talking about, Eli, what happens is these candidates want to go to the programs that are seen by the most people. And Jeopardy is one of the most watched newscasts in this market. So they pay to be placed in there as many times as possible. And it's generally this way. You'll probably have it again next year in Virginia because I believe the gubernatorial race is next year. And when there's a major kind of race, that's what you get. They just like to pick the shows that you like. They know that a lot of other people like as well. And so they try to buy time in them.
Can I tell a story? This reminds me of too. A few years ago, this was when I guess it was Mitt Romney and Barack Obama was running against each other. Anyway, I have a friend who's the promotion director, or was at the time, at WFXR, the Fox station, and they had the show American Idol. In a lot of cases with TV stations, they designate a certain amount of airtime, commercial time, to promote the station. And you try to not do anything else with that but promote the station. So during this election, the sales people came to the promotion person there and said, hey, you've got a spot to promote the station in American Idol. We've got a politician that wants it. That at first she said, no, I need to promote the station and that's a good place to do it. And no, you cannot have that spot. That spot ran for $1,500 for anyone else buying that particular 30 seconds. When they told her that they could sell it for over $10,000 for one 30-second spot, she said, oh, I think I can find another place to run my promo. And so they saw it. But the politician, whoever was buying the media for that politician, knew that that was the place to be. And so they were willing to pay a great deal of money for that time period.
So Tim, here's something that comes up a lot, and I think for this group here, Jim and Margie could answer this well. I'll set you guys up, and then you answer the question. So we mentioned WDBJ has 8 hours of news. So why do we need a 4 o'clock newscast in Roanoke, Virginia? Why can't we run Oprah again, something like Oprah? Why can't we run a Kelly Clarkson show? Why can't we run all these great syndicated shows? Jim Shaver, tell them, and Margie, please jump in and go up what the difference is as far as cash.
Well, Margie is better at this than I am because she's dealt with so much of that kind of programming. But essentially, if you add a newscast, you're not adding any people. You're not paying X number of dollars per program for the Ellen DeGeneres show. The news is people, particularly politicians, will buy news. And so every time you add a newscast, you've added another place to do that. We were talking about this today about losing Andy Griffith at 5:30. But when you put your news in there, there's very little increase because you use the same people, you use the same equipment, and you're not paying any kind of rights fee.
And can you confirm if I'm wrong on this? But in other words, what Jim's saying is at 4 o'clock, they can put those Channel 7 employees in there and it doesn't cost them a penny. But I want to say when we got Oprah from Channel 13, was it not almost $250,000 a year or something?
That was one of the things that my legacy has left at Channel 7. I'm the guy that lost Oprah. When I took over the program department, the guy that was selling it comes in one afternoon and he says it's going to be a 65% increase in her fees next year. And you've got 15 minutes to let me know. Well, of course you don't do that. You got to go talk to your salespeople and all that kind of stuff. So I had to refuse it outright. But the reason was Channel 13 belonged at that time to All-Britain Communications, and All-Britain Communications had the big ABC affiliate in D.C. The ABC affiliate in D.C. was going to buy Oprah, but it had to get Oprah at every one of the other markets in which it had a station. And All-Britain at that time owned Channel 13. So I didn't have a choice, but I cannot remember what we paid for her. She was the most expensive program we had.
Seems like it was like $60,000 an episode or something like that. For some reason, 60,000 sticks out in my mind for some, or maybe that was per week.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah, it was a lot of money, but she made a lot of money. I mean, she and provided a good lead in. There was one question popped up on the screen a few minutes ago that reminds me of something I'd like to suggest to people who are interested in following this up. Somebody had asked about Sinclair Broadcasting and its conservative bent to approaching news products. And Sinclair owns WSED in Lynchburg. that is probably true. What I was going to suggest is anybody interested in following this, just go to Wikipedia and read about each one of these companies that own the TV stations in our market. And Sinclair is one that is looked at as having a more conservative bent and seems to cover more national than local news in these markets. So there are little nuances in there that make a difference.
Well, this has been fantastic. We're an hour and 20 minutes in. We've hardly taken a breath, which is just wonderful. This was everything I hoped it would be and more. Are there any other questions?
I'm typing one.
Rita, great.
Does
You
anybody
want me to
want to
say
know?
what it is?
Yeah,
Does
go ahead.
anybody want to? Go ahead, Rita.
I'm wondering if either of you are familiar with Whitehead Media, Andre Whitehead on Facebook. He's got some programs that he does, radio and video, out of
Lynchburg.
the Hampton
Lynchburg.
Roads area
Yeah.
and also the Lynchburg area. And I've noticed Northrum has given him lots of time this year. And I've been somewhat surprised at that. Do you look for those kinds of things to pick up and sort of take over, you know, some of what's being lost?
He's been around a long
Yeah.
time.
Mhm.
I know him, and I'm not familiar with him now. I've been out of it so long, but he used to do talk program in Lynchburg, and
Mhm.
I think he's moved over to the eastern part of the state now, but I don't know exactly what he's doing. He was at an event Margie and I were at Monday afternoon, and Northam was there, and he was actually setting mics up on the stage and that kind of thing. But
He's
I
staying
just
pretty.
lost contact with him.
And one other thing, did either of you work when Ann Compton was there?
Yes, when I was working at the newspaper and was working the Richmond Bureau for DBJ. And of course I had that newspaper, highfalutin newspaper thing about, I've got to get out here and cover a story and dirty myself up with these broadcasts. And that woman came in there to cover a bank robbery. She just happened to be in town for the weekend. And I looked and I said, I've never been around a reporter that good in my life. Everything that woman got, she earned. I mean, she is a real.
But she did earn it. She didn't start out that way when she was local on DBJ. She was
That's-
pretty rough when she first started.
she,
And so I think in terms of the young folks now, if they had like what you and Mike are talking about that you'd like to take into them, how different that could make what we have in the long run. Because she started out green as heck and she became polished very quickly once she moved to the Richmond Bureau.
She was a Hollins College student, and she started
Right.
with DBJ as an intern. And she covered a lot of stuff then, and then she opened the Richmond Bureau for them and worked for I don't know how many years for ABC News as their White House correspondent for a while. A really good report.
Very good.
Well, as we wrap up,
Tim, one last thing I've got. This is like a Ripley's Believe It or Not. We're going to end it on here. There's so many things with Jim Shaver, but most of y'all have only known Jim Shaver since he came to the church. And he's talked about working for the Roanoke Times. Jim, you got to tell them what your body size was at the Roanoke Times.
Well, I'd rather not.
Come on, Jim. Nobody's going to believe this.
Year after I got out of college, excuse me, I weighed 265 pounds and I was smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day.
Oh, my gosh.
And we had a baby on the way, and I figured I had to straighten myself out or I wouldn't be around by the time I was 30. That
Wow.
was 45.
And now you know.
That's the information you didn't really need.
I was going to tell them my makeup color at the Clinique counter, which I still quote every time I walk by it. Sharon's like, "Will you be quiet? You're not buying any more of that."
We had a lot of fun. It was a really, really good time. And I worry about where we're going and that and a whole bunch of other things right now.
I remember when the stylist wanted to pluck Michael's eyebrows.
Oh yeah,
I'd
oh
like
yeah,
to
it was
say,
all.
I'd
So
like to say one thing. I always preferred DBJ over anything else. The quality of stories that you had, they were much kinder. than some of the other local stations. And so DBJ is the one I always stick with.
Hmm.
Even now, they have some young reporters, but people on the air, but a lot of them are very good.
Thank you, Jerry.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just glad that we had sufficient content that we didn't have to do like a lot of news sites today and lead with, Mike's makeup color and Jim's weight, attract viewers, that we were able to take the high road and have significant content. And so most everybody's here at Oak Grove we're all members, we're all brethren online tonight, and most of us members at Oak Grove. As pastor, we talked about this last week. One of the things that I think we want to be very aware of is I have no illusion that when we go to the polls, if we haven't already voted, that when we go next Tuesday, we're all going to pull this, check the same box or pull the same lever anymore. So we come with that, and that's fine. Go vote for who you think is the best candidate for the times that we are certainly facing at all levels. But I do want us to be aware of how we're being formed as we come into the congregation to engage the issues of the day, and just recognize that we're not all listening to the same media. We're not all reading the same newspapers. We're not watching the same or engaging the same internet sites. And that matters, and that can be a strength and it can be a challenge. And we just want to make sure that, our first primary focus is on being formed and shaped as disciples of Jesus, that the kingdom of God is our primary formation, but that there are other forces working on us, and they're not all neutral. And we need to be aware of that. And so that has been one of the things that has led me to wanting to kind of put some more information, some more ideas out there for us to think about as a congregation, all wanting to move in the same direction. If you go to the website, and one of the slider images that will go by at the top, we'll keep the image advertising these events. We'll keep it up there for a while. That's a direct link then to the page that lies beneath it. We'll have both sessions up there, I would assume, by tomorrow. There's also a fairly long sidebar of resources, most of which Rachel provided last week, but a few that I came across as well. There's a book link there of something I found helpful. Engage those if you will. I'll promote the website Spot the Troll again by Clemson University's Media School with 8 legitimate social media sites, some Facebook, some Instagram, some Twitter. But the question is, were they an account like you or I might put up, or were they put up by a troll, someone out there with less than noble intentions? And they're a little harder to discern than you might first think. I did not do very well on that quiz. So you can take a look at that. But Mike, Jim, thank you so much. I have learned tons tonight. It's great to be part of a congregation that has people that are as good as what they do as you all are, and can help the rest of us out. And so we're all blessed by this tonight. So thanks to both of you for your time.
Well, thank
It
you.
was fun. Thank y'all.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank
See you
you.
Sunday. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Eli.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Eli.
You're
Enjoy.
welcome.
See you, Eli.